Most of us who film weddings have only been doing so for a few years, but today I had the privilege of interviewing Dave Redmond, who filmed his very first wedding in the early 80s. He shares with us some of the knowledge and experience he's learned in almost 40 years of filming weddings. Tell me about how you first got into video and how you got into doing your first wedding.
Well, my dad had his own business in Leeds going right back to the 1950s and 60s. He had a company in Leeds called Redmonds of Leeds, and he used to film on cine film, and he was very good with it. And he used to make his own corporate videos. Well, there were corporate films, and so he'd film his own company. And then he used to, there was no internet obviously in those days, but if he got an opportunity to go and show somebody a film of his company, he'd take his projector and his screen along, and he'd go to their boardroom and he'd set it all up. And so it was part of their sales drive, really. And it was very good for them because there was nobody else really doing stuff like that in those days. And I used to sit and edit those films with him when I was a kid in the 60s. And so that's where I got the bug for photography and film and all that went with that. And then when video started in the late 70s, 77, somewhere around there, video really started to come along because there were camcorders. Initially, they were separate units, so you'd have a camera with a separate recorder, which had a tape in it, and then eventually the camcorder appeared, which was a big unit. It was a big shoulder-mounted unit, and I just got the bug for that. And I thought I can hire one of these cameras. Couldn't afford one at the time, but I'll hire one and I'll film a wedding. And so I just started doing them. I used to advertise in the local paper, and I used to get the odd weekend job. I mean, I had a full-time job at that time, but I used to do maybe five or six every year, every summer. And they weren't very good because I couldn't edit them very well. It would be an assemble edit. So I would take from the camera, I would go to a VHS deck, and I'd just take the best bits and dub them across. And there was no music.
So to interrupt, Dave, could you just explain what VHS is? Because I know we might have some young people watching this video, very young, who might not know what a VHS is. A
VHS, right? Okay. Well, we've got a VHS. We've got a drawer full of VHS here. That's a VHS tape, and a Panasonic. The Panasonic brought out a camcorder that would take one of those. So you can imagine how big the machine was on your shoulder because it had one of those in. So you take it out the camera if you wanted to play that in an ordinary VHS deck. But what I used to do was play it from camera and dub it onto another tape and do an assemble edit. So you would use the bits, you would record the bits that you want by dubbing across. If you made a balls of that in any place, you'd have to go back and record over the bit of tape that you just messed up. So if you got your in point wrong, you'd have to start again at that point. Because I used to go to the University of York to do a lot of editing up there. I had a friend who worked there. We used to be sat in there at 10 at night doing edits, and then the caretaker would be wanting to go home, and eventually he got the boot. But yeah, we did a lot of editing up there, and eventually that system became a Media 100, which was kind of the early version of what we all use now. So it was the early version of Final Cut or Premiere Pro or of DaVinci Resolve. Basically you would digitize the footage and edit it non-linear and output it. Again, it'd be outputted back out onto tape though, because there was no other medium to put it onto. You couldn't. The DVDs didn't exist, and there was no internet to put it out onto. So there was no means of making a file that you would then broadcast out by social media or anything. None of that existed. So you'd end up with another tape, but it was the final edit.
What audio gear did you use?
I didn't know. Just the mic. Initially, just the mic.
The built-in mic, is that?
Yeah. Oh, they weren't bad though. They were some sort of shotgun mic on them. They were pretty directional, but the Panasonic had a really good mic on it. And then eventually I went on to the there was cameras with high 8. I went on to, initially from VHS, I went to SVHS, which was a higher band version of VHS.
A more detail is that?
Yeah, it was well, VHS, I think it's 240 lines, so it's very, very low. SVHS was 400, I think. So it was it was a much better quality picture. And I started to get, I used to hire a Panasonic which had a mic input, and I bought a shotgun mic, and I can't remember what it was now. I think it might be a Sennheiser. And then eventually I went on to radio mics, which were on, FM. 174 megahertz or thereabouts in FM, and they were just rubbish, You get good audio until it didn't work, and then when it didn't work, you were stuffed. And so if it went off right in the middle of the vows, you were knackered. And it did happen, it happened many a time. But the payoff was good audio when it did work. So I experimented with them, and then quite often I used to just ditch it and think, no, go back to a shotgun mic.
I suppose that's quite unforgiving if you compared with now we can have multiple audio sources, and if one goes bad, it's like, oh, okay, we've got the other, but you only had one input, so you had to commit to that input. It's like Russian roulette.
I mean, I didn't. I mean, I suppose there was better equipment around, but for me, it was always on a budget throughout the 80s and 90s. Because in the 80s, I did it as a bit of a, I wouldn't say a hobby, but I made some money from it. But I had a full-time job at that time, and then in the 90s, I had two children, so I had a bit of a break from it all. And then I came back to it. I would say mid 90s, I came back to it. And the digital age was coming in. By, I think, 98, I bought a really good JVC professional camcorder, which had two XLR inputs. It had an onboard mic. It was still only 2-channel, though. You could have your 2 XLRs, or you could have the onboard mic and 1 XLR. But at least you had those options. And that was mini DV. And then I really ramped it up, because I started my business that I've got now, which is CVS Digital. I started that in 99. And so I invested in a lot of equipment. So I bought a full non-linear edit system, and I bought a deck which would allow me to transfer the footage. It was still real time though. In fact, I'd forgotten this, but I've got the deck here. It's the first deck that I bought. It cost me 1,200 quid. About year 2000. That's a JVC mini DV deck to VHS or SVHS. So you could dub. I can't hold it. So you could dub from mini DV to SVHS, or just standard VHS, or you could go back the other way. You could go from SVHS to mini DV if you wanted.
I was just going to butt in and explain, if anyone wasn't clear, mini DV that was probably one of the last, and maybe still exists in digital tape formats, wasn't it? It was the best possible resolution, but it wasn't like people at home couldn't plug it in the telly and watch it. So that's why Dave got that converter, so he could convert it to VHS, the big cassette that everybody had a player for. So that's mini DV. I mean, I've got about 700 of these bloody things upstairs in up in my archive upstairs. I've got about 700 tapes. How did you go about promoting weddings? In the time before the internet, before social media and all of that, what was your way of reaching customers?
I put an advert in the local paper, wedding videographer. I can't what else it said. It didn't say a lot, but it was a couple of lines. And I used to advertise and there was wedding services in the local rag, so you'd get wedding photographers in there. And I put wedding videographer. There were other guys around, obviously. I wasn't the only one doing it. And I used to get responses from it. Eventually, I went to the Yellow Pages. It was a big, thick yellow book that was distributed free to everybody in the country. Every household and every business had one. And if you wanted to find a wedding videographer or photographer or a plumber or a garage or whatever the hell you wanted, you'd look in there. the web didn't really get going until broadband really took off, which I'd say would be 2004, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, about 2004, somewhere around there. Before that, it was dial-up, and it was just painful trying to do anything on the internet. You couldn't. It was so slow. So you could have a website, but you couldn't have video on it. There was no images that you could play.
What kind of were like horrible scenarios that could happen in the days of tape and
tape chewing up? Literally. Yeah. I mean, that tape in there is, it's delicate stuff, isn't it? And if that fouls up in the machine, you're stuffed. And I never had one actually go wrong in the camera. I never had that happen. But certainly in the dubbing process and stuff like that, I had tape jamming up in the machine, and I've got to take them apart and splice the tape back together with tape. We actually use sellotape, but don't tell anybody. And batteries were very unpredictable. You still have a meter which would give you, 3 or 4 bars, but you'd regularly get batteries that say they've got 3 bars in it and just suddenly go. Because the technology wasn't as good, was it?
How has the cost of gear changed over the years? Like now, a lot of people can get into videography because they could buy a cheap second-hand camera that's still really amazing. How was it starting out? I know you said you hired, but like over time, how's the cost of entry to wedding videography changed?
Massively cheaper. I mean, I bought a JVC camcorder. I bought that deck I've just shown you, that huge JVC deck, and I bought a computer with the very early version of Premiere on it, and all of that. And I bought some mics and cables and blah blah blah. I spent about 16 grand at that point. Yeah, no, but that's what it took to get going.
Yeah.
So, I think you can bring that down to 1,600 quid now. But you could make that back off 2 weddings, couldn't you? But I suppose it's you've got to have the experience there. So, you've got to, I think you've got to have an eye for video and photography. I don't think if you haven't got the eye, I don't think you can do it. I think it's like singing. If you can either sing or you can't. You maybe can be taught some of these things to a degree, but ultimately, if you can't sing, you can't bloody sing. And I don't think if you can't see an image for what it should be, then I don't think you can do it. And I don't think it can be taught, only to a certain level, and then beyond that, you've got to have a talent.
Yeah, some great videographers still use like older cameras, don't they? And it's like you say, it's because they've got the eye and they know about light and composition and.
Yeah,
and I guess
there's an old. I know I've said it online a few times. There's a very, very old saying, which is, "It's not the plane, it's the pilot."
I was going to ask you that there's loads of different video cameras available now. Aren't there? There's DSLRs, mirrorless. There's still like the big style cameras. So I just wanted to check what cameras you're using like nowadays and why, really. Okay.
Well, I've got. Loads of different cameras, to be honest. The smallest one I've got is this GoPro, which is a Hero 7, and then I've got 2 GH5s, Panasonic GH5s. I mean, I love the GH5s, and there's very few jobs that I don't use them for. Stuff, because I've got a Zion crane. And I bung it on that, and I can get round, if it's a factory or industrial or stuff like that. It's so much easier to move around, rather than lugging a bloody great camera on your shoulder and stuff. You get around so much quicker. I've got a Canon 5D 3. I still use the Canon. I still love the image I get off the Canon 5D. I know the megabits are quite low on it. I don't think they give a lot of megabits today. I think it's only 28 megabits, but the image is beautiful. And
it is. The Canon colours are unbeatable.
Yeah, there's just something about the colour, isn't there? On Canon. I don't know what it is, but there's just something. It looks more filmic straight out of the camera.
So thank you very much, David. It's been amazing to learn how you started out and how things have changed over the years and how the technology's changed and times have changed.
it is frightening almost looking back, when I think how many changes particularly in video technology there's been over the years.
Yeah.
That's the frightening bit, because when I think, I started on cinefilm, and now, I know we do use them professionally. We can use these professionally, and it's just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, if anyone has got any questions when they watch this back, I'll ask if Dave doesn't mind keeping an eye on the comments. It's going to be on our YouTube channel. Keep an eye on the comments, and then Dave will get them answered for you.